Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo! I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 54 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Pete Zayas, aka Laker Film Room, and half of the Laker Film Room podcast. I can't believe you're on the pod, man. I'm so excited. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. It's good to be free. Congrats on the wedding. We had both of us had more movement in our lives than the Lakers did this offseason. So good to see you, man.
That's
good to talk
true.
to you.
Just quickly, before we get into, so we're going to be doing a season preview, hitting on some big questions that we have for offense, defense, JJ, Rob, etc. What were your thoughts about yesterday's season opening press conference with JJ and Rob?
I liked it for the most part. I mean, it's a political event to some degree, right? They're going to say what they need to say. But the big thing I wanted to know from this last couple of months is I really wanted a culture reset with Redick coming into the building and being like, everyone needs to get their asses to involuntary workouts, which Rob had a nice little Freudian slip on that. Just get in the gym. Like, obviously, if you're over 30, if you didn't play for Team USA, get your ass in the gym and let's get to work. And so that has been everything I've heard about the team just over the course of this summer. And I thought that they communicated that well. But yeah, there is a certain amount of like, we know what this team is to a degree. I'd love to see it from the beginning of the year, but there's also that, I think you asked that question about picks, right? And like, to what degree would you be willing to make moves? So the Lakers are kind of stuck in this place in between right now of like really going for it but also building something healthier long-term. And so I think that second part, they're on the right track there, but a lot more work to do. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's definitely a political event, and I think JJ has excelled in that setting. I said that his intro presser to me was arguably the most impressive intro presser I've seen for a new head coach. Like, I mean, he's a media professional, right? So he knows how to answer questions. He can disarm with his charm or humor or whatever. So I think he can handle whatever you throw at him pretty well. But I thought the Vando news was like, you got to hearing some stuff, but the double foot surgery, it's hard to spin that in a positive way. And it's not, so he had the procedure done for the midfoot injury that he injured in Boston, but then he'd been dealing with some bone spurs that have been nagging. So there's sort of like a 2-for-1 special of, if you're already going to be out, might as well address both. So like, I guess it's maybe not as alarming as it sounds, but still it's double foot surgery. Like he's been out for several months now. And based on the way the last few seasons have gone, I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be ready by opening night, but it's a new training staff, new medical staff. Yep. We'll see. Maybe things are different, but guys that have tended to have their target return date pushed back. So we'll see with that. And then, the other thing was the trade stuff and Rob saying that he would be open to trading one or both picks, but it would have to be a deal that made sense. And I think that's going to be one of my questions. It's like, what type of deal makes sense? So let's get into it. What is your biggest offensive question for the Lakers entering the season?
Probably the bench. I think Knecht is a very important player. Last year's team, where it landed with the Rui starting lineup, by the end of the year, every other day, it was like, hey, he scored this many points since Happy Hairston was on the team. But the bench had 4, and I think that just offensively, that's the place where there's more room for growth. Can Gabe recover a certain amount? It's such a wild ride to see him go from starting point guard on NBA finalist to just like totally incapable on offense last year. It was really a lost season for him, but to what degree can he be a part of the offense coming off of the bench? So him and Knecht, I think, are big figures in just like getting a certain amount of bench production. But that for me, I'm really bullish on this team offensively. Redick's been talking around some concepts that I've been really wanting for a couple of years that I think with naming that starting lineup, those are your 5 best offensive players with Knecht coming up as well. But I really think everything is kind of calibrated toward, they should be shooting for a top 3, top 5 offense this year. I have way more questions on defense than I do on offense.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, starting Rui, obviously if he's coming off the bench, you can make the case that he's like the 6th man or at least that, primary bench scorer type. And with him being in the starting lineup, it does raise some questions of like, well, we'll assume Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood return at some point. So putting those guys there, it's like, I mean, it's either Gabe, Dalton, maybe Max is like a dark horse for a bigger offensive role. And then you also have Christian. So like you do have some options, but like that could also be a glass half full type perspective. It could easily go glass half empty with that group. So it could play out in various ways. My question is, what is the new offensive hierarchy? And maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's much of what we've seen for the last year and a half with this core 5, core 6. But, like what is, and just to me leads to more questions of like, what does LeBron off the ball more look like? And I thought Zach Lowe, raised a good question to JJ Redick of like, we've heard this before from coaches of we're going to take the ball out of LeBron's hands and we're going to empower other players. And like, it always ends up like maybe you see it for a month, a couple months, and maybe that's being generous. You see it for like a game, a few games, and then it just ends up being like, I mean, and for good reason, right? Like LeBron is arguably the best player of all time, one of the best playmakers and passers of all time, if not the best. So like you want the ball in LeBron's hands, but what does LeBron off the ball look like? What does AD as this Jokic slash Sabonis passing hub look like? How much of that do they actually implement? And then they've been talking a lot about Austin and empowering him more and on ball, putting the ball in his hands. So is that like a second unit thing where we saw that he struggled at the beginning of last season when given the keys to, some second unit lineups. But that was also coming off Team USA, and then he had a much better second half of the season. But like, who does that come at the expense of? Is that a little bit less of AD and LeBron, or is that like now Austin's the third guy? D'Lo takes a step back. Maybe they leverage his catch and shoot ability a bit more, and D'Lo's more of like the fourth option. And like, how does that sit with D'Lo? So I think that there's a lot of questions here in terms of with a new head coach, new offensive system, you can restructure things. With LeBron about to be 40, maybe he does finally cede some more control of the offense. But at the same time, he's still LeBron, and he still looked great to close the season, looked great with the Olympic team. So I think this question for me kind of leads to just several other questions, but like where do you see the offensive hierarchy?
So one thing I would argue is that they definitely took strides toward taking the ball out of his hands last year. And a couple of data points, I'm on Synergy right now. For pick and roll possessions that include passes, Austin was our highest ranked player. They tied, 1,027 possessions for Austin on the pick and roll, 1,007 possessions. That's just my bad eyesight. I thought they were tied. 1,007 possessions for D'Lo. You got to go down to number 31. Yep, LeBron's at number 31. He ran 832 pick and roll possessions with passes as well. So when was the last time LeBron James was your third most frequent pick and roll player on a team, right? Now, I think there's some space to explore within that. If you listen to my pod, I talk a lot about we were kind of a weird 5-out team in that we ran a lot of pick and rolls, or at least more than a lot of 5-out teams do. And so just kind of a more conventional 5-out look, which I think is what you're talking about with the Jokic, Sabonis type of hub of passing offense with AD. At least that's an element of it. We have a LeBron, which a lot of those teams don't have that style of forward to fill that type of spot. But I think that the Lakers did take strides in that direction. I think with the starting lineup, what it puts you in a position is like wherever our biggest advantage is that night is where the hierarchy. And that might mean 12, 15 shots for Rui. Might mean 4 on another night, and LeBron's our pick and roll guy. It might mean that LeBron is sort of playing that Draymond role that he played for Kerr with Team USA, where he's like, I'm just going to stand there and D'Lo's cooking tonight. So we're going to have him running off of screens, and we know they can't guard him, and it can flow into a ball screen out of that. So it's sort of like when your best offensive teams, it can be not reactive to, but it can really punish kind of the weaknesses of the opponent that you're playing toward. And so LeBron will always be at the top of the offensive hierarchy when it all comes down to it. And there is a certain amount of, you got to play one way for 43 minutes of a game, and then LeBron assumes more of that role in the last 5, but also in the playoffs too. But it's also determined by team. If we're playing Denver, the ball screen with AD and Jokic with AD and LeBron is going to work on Jokic a lot better than it will against Golden State, who's just going to switch that. And Draymond can kind of win that ground game there. So really, I think the Lakers are in a place where it's like, whatever you're bad at, we can really exploit.
Yeah. And that's why, I know that there was a split among the fan base in terms of like Rui versus Vando for that fit starter spot. To me, I lean toward Rui just because of
Interesting.
For me, it was sort of like enhancing the strength of the team.
I totally get the argument for it. Yeah.
So it's just because a lot of times, as you've noted on your podcast, like teams will put guards on Rui because you're sending your two best front court defenders to AD and LeBron, and then that third front court guy, sometimes you're going to put them on D'Lo or Austin to just kind of put some length on them, and then sometimes you would have like a 6'4" guard on Rui. And he punishes mismatches, and JJ touched on that the data backing that up. So I think, to me, like there are certainly defensive concerns with that lineup, and they don't have a traditional perimeter stopper, and that's a concern. And it's a lot on Austin and Rui defensively, but I think the offense might be so good that if they can be second or third in the league in terms of offensive rating, like with that group, when like extrapolating it out. And then even league average or slightly below league average defensively, that's still a really good lineup, and a lineup that I think can be successful. So, what about the defensive end? What's on your mind? What's your biggest question with the defensive end?
So, the defense that Darvin ran last year was, I call it the Budenholzer system, and it's very much calibrated toward being able to run the same thing on a night-to-night basis, and it's built on certain principles, such as we're going to leave the worst shooter on the other team open, live with shots from them. There are certain types of threes. Lord, did we?
I just had a lot of flashbacks the last season.
That's also something, too, that I think creates bad habits in players, where it's like, oh, we're not supposed to close out to him, so I'm not really going to. It's like, no, you are. He's a pro. You are supposed to actually close out to him. It's also, there are certain threes where it would give up a wing three if it wasn't preceded by a paint touch. Meaning that you played basketball. If the ball's at the top of the key and you're standing at the wing and you want to take that three, you got to catch and turn, right? And then when you've got to square up, that adds some left to right movement in your jumper that can drop percentages. So they'll surrender the threes off of the catch from there to not give up the driving kicks. Darvin, it was really important to him to not give up free throws, right? And it's like, shoot, if you're not going to guard anybody, you aren't going to have many fouls drawn, right? And so what I'm looking for is JJ referenced a certain level of physicality, a certain level of we got to contest more shots. We were in the bottom third of that. It's a difficult balance when you're starting from a deficit personnel-wise, and it's like when you're at that deficit, it's more like we got to keep you in front of us, because if you get us in rotation, now, again, I would love to have a partner for AD to where we could just free AD up and he could solve pretty much any problem that you have, but you have to have somebody protecting the rim. So if AD isn't, somebody has to, and we don't really have that. So I'd love to see more of a mix of zones, a more of a kind of have to hook or by crook with that group. But I also agree with you that your point of like, it only has to reach a certain level for it to be really productive, because the offense should be really good. So yeah, I have more questions off of the bench and kind of what those blended groups look like. But with that starting group, they at least got a head start on what they could do defensively. But there's a ceiling for sure.
For me, my question is, how do they survive without AD? And there's two parts. they don't, but there's two parts to this. So it's like, one, like, how do they survive for the 10 and 12 minutes a night he's off the floor, and not having Christian Wood and Jared Vanderbilt potentially to start the season is a bad start to that.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So, and interestingly, if you look at the lineup data last season, the Lakers were about, basically the same with AD on and off defensively. Now, obviously the eye test, I mean, they're clearly a much worse defense without AD, but it was more the offensive end. I think they're about 6 points per 100 possessions worse offensively without AD. So there was that -6 overall with AD off the floor. And that, I mean, just in general, like, how do you optimize lineups without Anthony Davis? But I think the second part of it is, like, AD is not guaranteed to be as healthy as he was last season. And if he's not, like, what do you do? And especially if you don't have Christian Wood and Jared Vanderbilt. This is where, going into the lack of movement and the team not addressing the backup center position, in part because of the player options that they gave out, like, this is where I think that could come back to haunt them. If AD goes down, even if it's just for a week or two, how do you survive that week with a center rotation of Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood? And potentially you don't even have Christian Wood to start the season. So that to me is the thing. And I think it does blend into your question, or, your answer as far as, like, how are you blending the groups? How are you optimizing? So for me, I did a lineup episode a couple days ago, and the one lineup for the non-AD groups I like is Jackson Hayes, LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, and Austin Reeves. And, I know you guys have talked about it as well. Like, I think the proper way to split it is LeBron and Austin, D'Lo and AD. And then, Jackson, Rui, and LeBron have played really well together, in terms of lineup data. And then I think Gabe in there, like, you could go with Max, you could go with Dalton, you could go in various ways, but I like Gabe in the perimeter defense there. So, what do you think of that lineup and sort of the way to optimize without, AD?
No, I think that's absolutely the case. I think that with your more limited players, your defense always starts with your 5. And in Jackson's case, he's an odd defender in that he's got this leaping ability, but not really off of a back pedal, which is what you have to do a lot of times when you're engaging on a pick and roll, right? You kind of hedge at the level of the screen, but you got to back pedal and decide, do I have to engage with the guard up front, or do I back pedal to take away that lob? And he doesn't make that decision particularly well. But in his time in New Orleans, one thing that they found there is he was actually better at defending 4s. And they had so many guys in the front court between Zion and Nance and Valanciunas that they played more 2 big lineups than we did. And Hayes had some utility on the perimeter. And so between that and LeBron, I think the easiest defense for that group is probably to switch. Gabe's got some ability there. Austin can be a bit of a weakness there. But again, I think that's more of a containment group. You are in a sort of a survival space. If you've ever coached high school basketball and you're like, oh crap, that team's got 4 guys who can dunk and I don't have any. There's a certain, all right, we're going to our zone package. Let's keep them out of the paint, And so that I think is a certain amount of a kind of play to what you can do. So between zones and switching, I think they can survive that. But I do very much like that group. But I didn't love the Austin and Gabe minutes together last year. But if Gabe plays the like he did 2 years ago, I think it'll work.
Yeah, and then that's where maybe you could pivot to Max. I guess like for me, it was hard when I was coming up with all these different lineups. But my answer was often just put Max in, and I guess that transition.
JJ likes Max.
He does, and
he really seems to.
Yeah. So that transitions to me for who is your player, Lakers player X factor for next season.
I'm a huge Dalton Knecht fan, knowing that my heart's going to be broken by his defense at some point. But that kid can score the crap out of a basketball. I was so impressed with him in Summer League in that I think that the Summer League environment with JHS being out and just that team was crap to start Summer League. And everybody was really looking for themselves.
Yes.
Oh, man, it was rough. Every guy kind of looking for themselves, a sort of like off ball, I depend on you to get me the rock type of player. That's kind of a hostile environment for them when there's no real point guard. It was Tony East or something like that was just, shooting ugly floaters all game, not looking, And so the fact that he was a double-digit scorer and he has presence around the rim, this is a big difference between Taurean Prince and him. I feel like he's kind of taking the offensive role of Prince as that movement guy. We didn't do that enough with Prince. He didn't move enough. But the fact that he can get to the free throw line, put pressure on the rim, he can score 10 points while going 3 for 9, and it's not just because he hit 3 threes. He's getting 5-6 shots at the rim. That type of player, if you put Knecht out there with other guys you got to worry about more, which is not the case in the Summer League team, I think he's just going to eat. He's not going to get the same type of usage, but I really think that once he gets comfortable, I don't want to put too much pressure on him early on, but his skill set, I always wanted Clay next to LeBron and AD back, in Clay's prime especially. And that type of skill set just, I think, beautifully balances out what LeBron and AD do. So for me, he's that guy of like, how good can Knecht be? How soon? How about you? Who's your guy?
Max Christie. I think we both had kind of, I think, hinted at this with our earlier answers, but for me, it's Max just because I think this is the exact type of player that the Lakers have needed over the last couple of years, that prototypical 3-and-D wing, 6'6", long arms, athletic. Last year, he was statistically their best rebounder under 6'8". And I think that's something that this group really needs, especially, looking at Gabe, Austin, D'Lo, like there's not much rebounding there. I mean, Austin will have his games where he gets, 8-10 rebounds, but for the most part, like I think Max, his athleticism, the physicality that he can play with, and to me, it comes down to just confidence. And JJ talked about that. Like I think if Max is given I think he deserves it, but like he gets a certain role of 18 to 22 minutes a night, or potentially even more if he, plays his way into it. Like, I think him knowing that I'm getting a certain role, and I know where my shots are, I know where my shifts are in the rotation, and he knows what to expect on a nightly basis. Like, I think there's a high ceiling there. So I know some people thought it was a bit of an overpay with the contract. Like, to me, I think he's going to exceed the contract, during the life time of it. And if he does so next season, like, if we're looking at ways for the Lakers to exceed expectations and to outperform what this roster is, you're going to need some of the younger guys to take a step. And when I'm looking at like who could be that guy, I think it's Max Christie.
I feel like we need 2 out of 3 between Gabe, Max, and Knecht to hit this year in order to get to where we want to go.
And I think, so, I mean, with Dalton, it's just a defense, right? Like that's just like the guy I think of is like a Luke Kennard, and he's obviously bigger than Luke Kennard, and he's got a better bag offensively. So it's not a perfect comparison, but like, I just have all these memories of LeBron calling Luke Kennard into the action and basically playing him off the floor in countless games. And can Dalton avoid that fate? And thankfully he's on LeBron's team, so he's not going to be getting picked on by LeBron.
But others will.
That's sort of other people will pick on him. So like, can he get to at least like a, not even necessarily average level, but like not horrible, right? So, what's your biggest JJ question?
Defense. I don't know that much about him on the defensive end. I think that's where his biggest problems are. And as I was working for the team at the time, doing a whole bunch of research, that was my day job, was listening to JJ Redick podcasts for like 3 weeks. And I felt like I got a much better feel for what he believes in on the offensive end than the defensive end. When you combine that with the fact that I think we just have better offensive players than we have defensive players on this team. We don't have enough guys who really, they defend as a matter of that's what they do for a living. And so like, is how is he going to work with that? And there are certain aspects, for example, transition defense. If we want a specific topic, he's talked a lot about corner crashing, right? Well, what was Darvin's rationale for not doing that? It was like, hey, are we going to get back in defense? Are LeBron and AD going to bust their ass back in defense? That's your 4 and 5 to start the season. And a lot of times when they weren't in that mode, the other 3 would be like, okay, that's one of those nights. We're going to join you in that. We're going to get our ass kicked. We're going to give up 38, 40 point nights if we don't get back in defense. And so how does JJ Redick address the issues that he has kind of sitting in front of him? I think is going to be a big, big part of how well we do this season, because I think we'll be good on offense.
I guess what tweaks would you like to see on that end? Like, how do you feel about the corner crashing strategy?
I like the corner crashing strategy. It's one of those things where like you can't do half measures. So the corner crashing is something that you need to be able to put enough pressure on the other team to where they start keeping guys back in transition. Where if you only send guy from the weak side corner, for example, if you're going to send one, it's usually that other guy. AD has always had, you can go to the boards whenever you want type of, permission. But if you're sending the weak side corner crasher, he needs to be good enough at it to where it's like, or it needs to be in that situation where Ruby's being guarded by that 6'4" guy that you're talking about. And it's like, oh crap, we have a problem that we actually have to put more resources toward it. So I like it. I think that there are more ways to solve a problem than just defensively. Like in chess, for example, I like to play chess. I'm not very good, but I like to play it. And one of the ways you get yourself out of a bind when on defense sometimes is to attack them. It's like to put pressure on something somewhere else so that they have to kind of abandon that attack that they're in the middle of. And so that is kind of how I see that. I agree with it to a point, and I think Max is a super important character in this, as is Knecht. He's a guy that can get 5 to 7 rebounds, which is a difference that he has as opposed to Prince.
That's also why this kind of just building off what you've been saying. Like I liked hearing from JJ that he got asked the question about not having a traditional center on the roster, and how they would kind of combat that. And he said, I'm not going to use Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood the same way defensively as I would Anthony Davis. And that was something we saw a lot of last season, was those guys being used the same way as Anthony Davis, and the results were not good. So I think it sounds like one thing, even when talking about Rui's role, he was like, I want to have the flexibility for it to evolve. And like JJ is again, just saying the right stuff, and we'll see how much of it he can actually apply. But I think so far he's sort of come with like this adaptable, flexible mindset when answering questions and when talking through things. And if he can actually implement that, I think that's a step in the right direction, especially compared to the previous regime. My question for him is, how does he problem solve during chaos? Because that is something that like you can't really prepare for as a first time head coach, and really for him as a first time NBA coach in any sense. And you're going to have maybe AD goes out, right? And now you have to problem solve for a couple of weeks, or maybe you're on a 3 or 4 game losing streak, and the fan base is getting upset, and it's on First Take. And like, I always say this, like, First Take and the national shows are talking about Darvin Ham's rotations in a way that they're not talking about any other NBA head coaches' rotations. That's just because of the Lakers and the attention that they get. And when you talk about the Lakers, you get clicks, you get views. So I think for JJ to kind of navigate that, like, that's just something that he won't know how to, or we won't know how he'll navigate the fire until he's in it. And, there's the whole like peacetime general versus wartime general, right? And so far, I think he's been a pretty good peacetime general. He said all the right things, but once he's actually in it, like, how does he handle that chaos? And with the Lakers, there's always a little bit extra compared to the average coaching job. So, you have the LeBron element, the LeBron-Bronny element. Like, there's all these things that are just going to come up during the season. So, for me, like, just how does JJ navigate that? And it's something we won't know until probably the end of the season, but that to me is going to be something that's fascinating, especially for a guy we just don't know. We don't have the data points for him really, and like how he can handle that stuff.
I would say though that we know him as a person to a degree. I think he's the spiciest person who's had the job in a while. In that, he's the guy that's at the press conference going to be like, I don't give a what they're saying about me. And he was the hated guy when he was at Duke, if you were watching hoops back then. And so he has this sort of chip on his shoulder that will be an interesting dynamic to see with the LA media dynamic that you're talking about, because if you're in that type of space and, you're that wartime general or things aren't going so well, and you got that like level of, man, I don't give a crap about what you say, there's potential for some interesting times, some interesting moments this year with Redick that like Vogel didn't have that personality. Darvin's went in kind of a different direction. Mike Brown wasn't like that. So Redick versus the LA media and just like the national media more so could cause some fireworks for sure.
I'm sure I'll get it a couple times.
Always fun, right?
for things that write or say. But no, and to be clear, like I've been high on JJ throughout the whole process. So that was not like an anti-JJ question. It's just more of like a curiosity of just, we have not seen him, like everything's been perfect, so to speak, since he's been hired, in terms of just like they haven't had to really put out any fires. It's different once you're in it. And also I think kind of a subsect to this, I guess, is like with Darvin, a lot of the ways that he would problem solve would be going smaller. So there's also like the schematic, systemic element to this of like, what is JJ's version of that? Of if Austin Reeves, like for Darvin, it was Austin Reeves is struggling to start the season. Let's move Austin to the bench and let's give Torian this 50-game leash, and let's move D'Lo to the bench, and let's keep Rui in a certain role. And it was like you can problem solve in different ways. So for me, that's kind of the other element to this is like, what is JJ's leash with each player? Like, how does he view, the flexibility, like kind of going back to the flexibility and adaptability with things, like how flexible is he with his system if it's not working? And, is he changing things after 10 games, 20 games, 30 games? Like what's his viewpoint and the rigidity there, which I think has been something that Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel both had to an extent of just like, they believed in their systems, and they certainly had some success. Darvin got to the Western Conference Finals, Frank won championship, but at times it also undermined that, I think, and not being able to adapt and realize, hey, maybe Torian Prince is probably better coming off the bench. Like, hey, maybe we shouldn't bench our third, fourth, and fifth best player. Like, and Frank had his own stuff. So like that to me is more, I think there's like the bigger kind of macro, there's going to be fires throughout the season. How does JJ handle that? But there's also like the smaller details of, if this guy's in a slump, do I move him to the bench? Do I reduce his role? Like, how do I handle that? if this offensive system I'm trying to implement isn't working, or the guys aren't understanding it, like how do I, where's my leash with that? So I think there's a lot of elements to this, but just how he navigates all of that, I think will be fascinating.
To your point earlier about adaptability, that's going to be such a significant part of this, because this is the first time that all of his basketball theories are going to be stress tested by the actual basketball. Like for a guy like even Frank Vogel, like Vogel's the way he is because he's done it for so long, right? For better or for worse, he's had all of his first experiences where it's like, oh, I want to try this, or I want to play this player, and then it didn't work some way. And then the adjustments to that, he's already lived that. This is the first time for Redick that he's going to go through that. So how stubborn is he, which is a trait of even a lot of great coaches, versus how adaptable is he going to be? Big story this year.
What's your biggest Rob question for this season?
Are we going to go for it or not? Let me ask you this. If Daniel Gafford were available this deadline, do you think we would trade a first and pick your guy, that whatever guys we need to make the salary work, right? Which might be a player that's in the rotation, right? If Gafford were available, do you think that we would go for it?
Yeah.
Gafford, or like that guy in a first. Do you
or
think that
they
we
should.
would make that trade?
They should.
No. That's what I'm saying. That's my question for Rob.
I would.
Do you make? I would too.
Yeah.
I would too.
Yeah.
Go. You have LeBron James and Anthony Davis on your team. Are we going to actually go? And now, mind you, my question about this goes beyond just Rob. I think he gets a lot of the ire. This goes up to ownership and the ownership levels who are looking beyond LeBron to a degree, and it's like, no, you have LeBron and AD on your team now. Are you going to go for it now? I thought Rob gave the correct answer in yesterday's press conference of like, it needs to be somebody that isn't just for a year, right? Like, so say, I would see why they wouldn't want to trade a first for, say, an expiring contract that was definitely looking for a max deal somewhere else, but is making $10 million this year because they were on a rookie deal, for example, right? This is a hypothetical player, but like, I see why they wouldn't want to give up a first for a guy who's going to be there for 2 months. But this team has talent. It needs to be balanced out a little bit better, but you're probably one real guy away or two smaller contributors away to getting there. And so like, do we have the appetite for that? And like every time Rob talks, it's like, oh, it's so hard to make trades now. And like, I get it to an extent, but that is the job that's ahead of them. So that's where I'm at, man, is like, are we really going to go for it this year? And I think his one sneaky answer that not sneaky, but like from a like, oh, this caught my ear standpoint was like, we'll know more in 30 games about whether or not it's worth going for it. Did that catch your ear? Because it caught mine. And it's like, yeah,
I talked about that last night. That was. Yeah. I mean, it like logically it makes sense because that puts you at about like early January, and realistically at this point, they're not going to make a move. Like you have the December 15th guys who become available, then you have the January 15th guys who become available. So like, I would suspect if this team makes a move, it's going to be after January 15th, right? Like it just logically, that's how the NBA trade season works. And you want to be, pulling from the widest pool possible in terms of potential players. But yeah, no, that caught my attention because I think, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, but like it goes into the flip side of this where like it could go one of two ways, right? So they could be 18-12 or 20-10 and playing really high level basketball, and it could be like, okay, like this is clearly a group that's worth investing in, and they're a move or two away from being right there with the top of the West. And like, let's go for it. But it could also be the flip side where you don't have Christian and Jared to start the season. Maybe you do have a minor LeBron or AD injury where those guys miss a week or two.
Yep.
You're 500, maybe even a couple games below 500 with the way that they've tended to start seasons over the last few years. And all of a sudden, if you're 13-17 in January 3rd, you're like, well, what's the point of investing in this group? Because it's going to be much of the same of like, maybe we make this mad dash to be a 7 seed, but then we're probably losing in the first round to Denver again or whoever. So that's my one problem. And this is to kind of go off on a tangent a little bit. Like,
please,
I typically agree with most of your Laker takes, but the one thing I've disagreed with.
I love this. Let's do it.
I find myself not on an island necessarily, but like I guess it's people are split on it. But I find myself on the other side of like, I felt like it would have been better to go for it this summer and build a team that they wanted to have entering the season. And if it doesn't work, like if you've given up both picks, and obviously you're kind of in a corner and you can't really get out of it. But to me, they've kind of entered the last 2 or 3 seasons with the mindset of, we're going to make a move, or we're going to try to make a move at least closer to the trade deadline. And it's caught, I think there's been collateral damage with players in terms of being in trade rumors and not being sure if they're going to be on the team or not. But also then you kind of saw like the 2023 trade deadline, like it worked. They turned the season around. They made the Western Conference Finals, but like I think that was more of an exception than the norm. And typically you see teams that make championship, or teams that win the championship, rarely make a big move in the season. Like the last one off the top of my head was Rasheed Wallace with the 2004 Pistons. But other than that, like, maybe they'll make a minor move, but in terms of like changing the starting lineup or like adding an all-star level guy or like a high level starter, that rarely happens.
Very unusual for a
championship team. So, and Dallas could have, I guess if they had won, like that would have proved that wrong. But like, so for me, I guess my one thing with the Lakers is like going into the season now, there is that out after 30 games or so of like, if they're under 500 or around 500, you can just pull the plug and say this team isn't worth investing in. But two, when we talk about offensive hierarchy and all this stuff, like I look at a guy like D'Lo as like realistically, if they are moving someone, there's a decent chance that D'Lo is one of those guys. And if you've been playing a certain way for 40, 50 games with D'Lo as your number 3 or number 4 guy, and now all of a sudden you're replacing him with either maybe you're getting a guard back, but that guard probably plays different than D'Lo, or you're elevating Max or Gabe into the starting lineup and going, maybe you're empowering Austin more, changing the starting backcourt. Like that's a pretty big shift to make 40, 50 games into the season. And now you got to sort of reset things a little bit for the final 30 games or so. So for me, like I get maybe deal wise, the deals are going to be slightly better, but I think the Lakers they have the assets that they have, and they're going to have to trade rotation guys as well. So like, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but like looking at like 2023 versus 2025, I feel like there's some key differences there. They don't have the Westbrook contract, Pat, Kendrick Nunn. Like they had tradable guys on big contracts. They don't really have that now. Like anyone they trade, it's going to be a blow to the rotation. So what say you about that kind of pushback to being more patient for toward the trade deadline?
So I think it's absolutely correct. It's the reason why I would also vastly prefer to make a deal over the course of the offseason, but you have to take it at some point from the theoretical into an actual player. And so who were the players that were available over the course of this offseason? Like for me, the trade that actually happened, the guy I was interested in was DeJounte Murray. But you also have to keep in mind, like, what did Atlanta want within that? They got 2 firsts and 2 defensive rotational players. So like our equivalent of that would be Gabe and Vando, and 2 firsts for Murray. Now, I think in a vacuum, like you consider doing that type of deal, but you have to think about what are the Lakers on the other side of that? Who's our best player on the defensive end outside of AD? We already, in my opinion, don't have enough good defenders on the team now. Yeah. If we trade 2 defenders and we've got 2 first-round picks going out, so now we don't have our best thing to trade out. Like, are we on the other side of that as a good enough defensive team to be able to go to where we want to go? And I don't think that we are. And so for me, was there anybody over the course of this offseason that like a Walker Kessler is going to cost you 2 firsts? You trade 2 firsts for
that's great. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right move. So I've heard different things on Grant's the one, and now I know that Portland is trying to get 2 firsts for him. So regardless of like how far those talks ever got with the Lakers and Blazers, like that's the Portland asking price. Right. That's steep. It's more than they gave up to get Jeremy Grant. And you could argue that, I would argue that his trade value has only gone down, because of the contract that he signed and stuff. At the same time, I kind of look at it like if let's just say hypothetically, the cost is Rui, Gabe, and 2 firsts. I think Rui to Jeremy Grant is a bigger upgrade than I think I've seen some say. Like, I think that is a pretty decent size upgrade. Like to me, he's basically, I mean, not the same physical, specimen as Rui. Like he doesn't have the same strength, but I think he's like a better version of Rui. So like similar flaws. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Better defender, better scorer. Actually, better like similar shooter, but I would say probably better shooter overall, and not a good rebounder. So like that's where they both kind of have some similar flaws. But you do lose Gabe. and that is a big potential loss to the bench. And then you lose the 2 picks, but like that to me is a trade. Now you do have Grant for, a couple more years, and like it's not great on your salary sheet, but like that to me is a move that, while I think it's an overpay, I think you potentially are in that conversation now with Denver, Dallas, and Minnesota, personally. So that's the one exception, but as to how realistic that ever was, and maybe they can revisit it closer to the trade deadline, maybe the asking price goes down. Like, sure. I certainly understand the argument to waiting. I just think, like, I think there's a lot of downside as well. And there's also just a scenario in which they don't make a trade. And it's like, you probably should have just gone for it in the summer.
I'm not a big Jeremy Grant fan. So like, I agree with this rationale. Like for me, the guy that you could get me interested in actually probably wouldn't involve picks, and that's Levine. Now, can you get to a good enough defensive team on the other side of that? Possibly with the picks, I think you can. But like for me, Grant made a couple of decisions where he would much rather be the man on a bad team, and the player that we played
in
the 2020 Western Conference Finals, I don't think is there anymore. I like Grant in younger years, but he's around 30 years old now, or at least in that range. And he's been paid. Like, we need a guy at that spot next to LeBron and AD that has got a level of juice to them. That now, is Rui that guy? Not necessarily. Like you said, they have the similar, but that's part of the reason why I'm not giving up 2 first-round picks for a slightly better version of this type of guy. I'd want somebody that I can really depend on both ends, and that gets more than 3.5 rebounds in 30 minutes per game, which is what Grant does. Now, would he play harder, be more committed to that in a real situation? For sure. But like, for me, he's not at that point where it's like, I'd rather wait and see if a team goes belly up this year, has some injury issues, needs to make some moves. Like, there are likely to be some different players available at the deadline to where nobody really moved me enough over the course of this offseason, while completely agreeing with your point that it would be way better if they did. And it would be way better than that to do that than wait till the trade deadline. So I agree with you there.
That makes sense. And I hadn't said my question, but it was basically the same thing as just, is Rob willing to use the picks? And I think, because you mentioned Zach LaVine, and I think that's a trade that they could do without giving up picks. Exactly. And then that sets you up potentially to make another move or 2 with those 2 picks. So that would be it. But like, to me, it just comes down to, we've now had 3 opportunities for this organization to invest in this group: 2024 trade deadline, 2024 offseason, and now the 2025 trade deadline.
Yes.
And if they don't make a move, and specifically to me, it's you got to give up at least 1 pick to show me that you are going for it, because just based on your assets, you're not really getting a game changer, a game changing player back unless you are giving up at least 1 pick. Like, maybe Levine's the exception, but he also comes with a lot of risk. And like, absolutely. I have questions about how does a Zach LaVine, Austin Reeves backcourt work? That could be pretty bad defensive. Like, he's like a better version of D'Lo in some ways. That there are some similarities there, some differences as well. But like, so to me, it just comes down to like, is Rob willing to give up at least a pick? And if they don't give up a pick at the trade deadline, obviously there are exceptions as to like how the season is played out to that point. But if they're still in the hunt and they don't go for it, that to me is telling as to like, you just don't believe in this group. So that's my question with that. Couple quick ones before we wrap up here. Where does LA rank in the West for you as currently constructed?
I think their goal should be to have a similar season to what the Clippers had last year. Those older type of teams are not going to hit the OKCs, who I think is going to lead the West. But I think that you can get to the 4 or 5 seed with a veteran team by adjusting to the team that you're playing that night, by playing the correct players, by having a good season, right? And so if this team does have championship aspirations, there have been very few champions that have been below the 4 seed, right? And so to me, that 4 spot is what they should be shooting for. Now, can they get there? It'll take some injury luck, but I think that if they have similar injury luck to last year and they just play the right guys, I think that's totally an achievable type of place. That was 2-3 games better than if we didn't play Torian Prince for 50 games the way we did. Could we have not won 2 or 3 more games last year? I think we could have, but again, are we going to get that same injury luck with LeBron and AD? That's probably wishful thinking too. So it's so hard to predict with this team because of that. But yeah, I think that we can get to that 4 or 5 seed type of range with my prediction. If you want that, I don't know, 6 seed, 48 wins, somewhere around there.
was going to be what my next question was, where do you have them finishing? And then win total wise, high 40s.
Yeah, high 40, and they should be shooting for mid 50s. If they have good luck, I think that they can get there, and that should be the goal of the team. So yeah, but I think that probably high 40s is the right place.
No, so I have them fifth in the West in terms of upside. I think that in a head-to-head situation, I would pick them over. I think there's a clear top four in the West as things are constructed. OKC, Denver, Dallas, and Minnesota. For me, it's in that order, but you could argue with whatever order you want. And then I have the Lakers fit there. And I think, Memphis is in the conversation, Phoenix. I think New Orleans has the upside to be in the conversation. Golden State might sneakily be better with some of the moves they made. But overall, I would pick the Lakers head to head against any of the other teams in the West, if healthy. The problem is, with the Jared Vanderbilt situation and Christian Wood, they're entering the season on the wrong foot, no pun intended. And I think, so that's my one hesitation with this group of already we're getting some red flags to kind of start the season with two guys that I think you're a bit higher on Christian Wood than I am, but I do see his potential. You're not?
Okay. No, I'm not. I'm
very low on Christian Wood.
I am too. Yes.
Okay. So we're very low on Christian Wood, but I do see his potential value, especially if he can shoot 36 to 38% on threes and offer kind of a different, like a bit of a change up to the Jackson. I think Jackson's better, and I think he should be the backup center, but I think there are matchups where Christian, especially next to AD could have some value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And then obviously Vando, his value speaks for itself. So for me, I have them right now tentatively finishing sixth in the West, about 49 wins, I would say. So I'm assuming they're going to have a worse health luck. You also, you mentioned LeBron and AD, but Austin and D'Lo too. If any of those, that was my infuriating thing with the whole health thing. Yes, Gabe and Vando are important guys, but you had your four best players basically healthy all season. And that's where it was come on. The one thing I would, he would rather, compare Gabe Vincent to Jimmy Butler that.
Oh yeah, that Miami game, that quote
that
drove me. The one thing I would say is that when you have an injury hit you all in the same place, we got hit but with injuries to all our best perimeter defenders. So all of a sudden it's Torian Prince's food for everybody, and our second best guy is Max, who they're not playing, right? And so like you said, Cam got hurt too, and so sometimes an injury, even if it's not to a top guy, and your argument's totally true, we had our top four guys for almost the whole season. If you get hit in one spot too many times, it's like in the NFL, if you're playing your third string left tackle, your quarterback might be getting sacked quite a bit, and that changes everything for everybody else.
And then to wrap up, one bold prediction for this season.
Dalton Knecht will be a top 5 bench scorer after the All-Star break.
Okay. I like it. That's you're all in on Dalton. I
love me some Dalton. That kid can score the crap out of a basketball, man. Figure out a way to get him on the court, man.
That's I don't, we've seen it inexplicably shooters tend to shoot worse for the Lakers. I don't know if it's the bright lights or the attention or whatever, but I don't see that with Dalton. I think Dalton's going to be 38, 39% minimum, entering as a rookie, which is, he's, JJ Redick said he's a top 1% shooter. I like that. For me, I think this one's maybe a little less spicy, but I have 80 finishing in the top 5 in MVP voting.
Really?
And
you gonna talk to all them other reporters? You gonna pitch it to them?
Well, so I think there's been a bit of a groundswell of 80 recognition. I think dating back to late last season. I felt like he started to get some buzz for defensive player of the year. Obviously, he didn't. Voting was way too low, but it felt like if that had happened maybe a month or two earlier, he might have actually had a legitimate chance to win the award. But going back to the end of last season, the playoffs, the Olympics, I feel like people are starting to finally give AD the recognition that he's deserved. So to me, that's going to be I think this is going to be AD's best season as a Laker, which maybe that's the bold prediction.
But
I think.
Man.
If
we're going to win 50
games,
these best years,
they have to win.
Yeah.
They have to, that's where the health comes into it. Maybe LeBron's not as healthy or LeBron takes a slight step back at age 40, which is probably reasonable, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's if AD can, if they can be a playoff team, not be in the play-in, and him assert himself as clearly the best. Like, I think he's the best player on the team, but clearly, like, from a national perspective, be the best player. That's where I think he gets into that top 5, if not top 3 conversation, where I think he should be. So that to me is my take entering the season. Like, I think this is finally the 80. It's felt like it the last couple of years. We've been like wanting it to tread that way, but I think finally AD is going to get the recognition he deserves.
Oh, I would love that. It's long overdue.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for showing us your beautiful face on camera. I know that you haven't.
It was a risk doing this to you, my Puerto Rican brother, but you got them handsome Puerto Rican jeans, Jovan.
But I appreciate you in all seriousness. So please, if you're one of the Laker fans that does not listen to LFR, I don't know what you're doing. Please check out LFR. It is a must listen. I listen to it all the time. I think you and Darius do as great of a job as anybody analyzing the team. You guys are both I learn things from listening to you guys, and I'm around the team on a daily basis, and you guys pick up on stuff that I don't pick up on. So just wanted to give you guys your flowers, and please check out LFR. Check out you've been doing more YouTube content now.
Yeah, I'm going to do a ton. Once the video starts, I'll be doing a lot of that. So yeah,
doing breakdowns and posting the podcast there as well. So definitely check out. I'll link it in the show notes. Appreciate you, Pete. You are the man, and I'm glad we got to do this.
Likewise, man. Good to see you.
And thank you all for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back next week with episode 55. I will talk to you then.